Ben Simmons, a partial dislocation of his knee. What does that mean for the Sixers moving forward? Because let's be realistic. Tonight's game, it's a game. But what happens when the playoffs come around? We got to figure out what is going to happen to the Sixers. And joining us to talk all about that right now on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline, CBS Sports NBA writer and Sixers insider, Michael Kaskey Blomain. Mike, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Josh, I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you jumping back on like you always do. So I'm just going to open-end question here because to me, I'm curious to know what happens with the Sixers team moving forward because, look, no longer to me is it a game-by-game thing. But Simmons out, to me, it's about what is the actual legitimate expectation for this team moving forward because we're only about a week away from the playoffs, and Ben Simmons is probably going to be out potentially 2 to 4 weeks, even if all things add up. So what can a Sixers team minus Ben Simmons, but with a healthy Joel Embiid, what can they do in the playoffs, Mike?
Yeah, that's obviously the big question, Josh, and I think the key is what you just said, the fact that it's a healthy Joel Embiid. I think Joel has looked, probably as good as he's looked throughout the course of his career. In Orlando so far, he came in healthy and well-rested. He obviously used the time while the season was suspended to make sure that he stayed in shape so that he could come back and, help the Sixers advance in the playoffs. Now, it's with Ben, how long he's out is open-ended at this point, so it's tough to say moving forward exactly what the team's going to look like. But at least in the short term or until he's back, you think that, Brett will, surround Joel with shooters. He said yesterday while he was talking to media members on Zoom that, even more of the Sixers offense is going to go through Joel now, and there's going to be even more of an emphasis on him, getting him the ball where he likes it in the post or at the elbow. So, obviously even more of the Sixers' success is going to depend on Joel and then surrounding him with, some of the guys that the team has put in place over the past couple of years. It's going to be up to pretty much everybody else to step up with Ben out, or at least until they're able to get him back.
Would you anticipate Al Horford being back in the starting rotation or maybe sliding Tobias back to the 4 and someone else slide into the 3, whether that's Glenn Robinson III, I know he's been banged up, or Matisse Thybulle, or something of that nature?
Yeah, that's at least what I would do for, continuity's sake. Obviously, Joel and Al didn't look great together during the time they had during the regular season. And I think surrounding Joel with shooters in the other 4 spots in the starting lineup is a better way to maximize his talent. But, there's a chance that Brett will put Al in the starting lineup again just to, put him out there. But if it was me, I would send him with shooters.
Do you think that something like this can work? Because, when Ben Simmons is out there as the traditional point guard, when he played the 1 before they made the move, the spacing was definitely out of whack when it came to Al Horford and Joel. But if you have somebody else with the ball in their hands and you don't have the spacing issue with Ben Simmons, is it more open to maybe actually be able to be efficient on the offensive side?
Yeah, I think that's probably Brett's line of thought there. Obviously, with Ben out of the lineup there, it will open up the court a little bit more to have, even if you have Joel and Al together, you'll have 3 other guys that can spread the floor in Shake, Josh Richardson, and Tobias, obviously. And Al, of course, is, certainly capable of hitting the mid-range jumper or spreading out to the 3-point line. So the spacing will probably still be a bit improved. I just thought that, for continuity's sake and to, maximize Joel in the post. But, I do think it's at least worth a look, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's what they're going to do come the playoff times. Obviously, these seeding games, the Sixers have been using as kind of an opportunity before the injury, at least, to, test out some rotations and see where guys fit well. And, there's a chance if Brett goes with this move today and they try it for a couple games and things just don't look like they're working out well or the spacing is still kind of wonky, he could switch it, move Al back to the bench and slide someone else into that starting spot.
What do you think the biggest issue with Al Horford has been? I mean, it's hard for me to believe that Al Horford just became this bad in one season. And then you see some stat lines over these exhibition games. One night he was minus 26 in 23 minutes. And when Joel Embiid was off the floor, that's who you need to rely on. So it's just hard for me to believe that he fell off this quickly. What do you think the biggest issue is with him?
I think the main thing has just been it's been a rough fit for him from the beginning, and I feel like he's never really been able to find a rhythm with the Sixers from the beginning of the season. I mean, I do think he's lost a step. Just in, that is what happens. Obviously, as you get older, he's been in the NBA for over a decade. Has a lot of miles on his body. He's over well above 30. So I do think he's not quite as nimble and quick as he was during his prime with the Hawks or even during his run with the Celtics. But I just think the main thing was the fact that he just really hasn't been able to be comfortable. He came here with the hope that he'd be able to complement Joel really well, but the way the league has changed, very rapidly year by year, where it's so much emphasis is placed on floor spacing and transition now. And he's kind of, doesn't quite fit the mold of what a four-man is in the NBA today. I think it's just been hard for him. Obviously, then he was in and out of the starting lineup. He was out, and then he had to go back in because of injuries, and then obviously he was just out, and now he's going back in. So I think it's been a rough first season for him in Philly, and hopefully, with whether or not Ben's able to come back, I think he's been playing decently in Orlando, and hopefully he can at least get a little bit of momentum moving forward to help them in the playoffs, because they'll obviously need him, especially if Ben is sidelined for a long time.
How much of the issues with Al Horford, Mike, have to do with the fact that maybe when Elton Brand signed him, that they miscast him in for the Sixers, and how much of the problems with Horford is really not as much him specifically as much as the front office signing the wrong guy to fill that void on the roster?
Oh yeah, 100%, Josh. I think you just nailed it. And I think a lot of people called that right from the beginning. There was a lot of skepticism about that Al Horford deal, and especially the fact that they signed him to a 4-year deal. It's one thing if you sign him to a 2-year deal and it didn't work out after the first season. He's an expiring contract. He's still young enough that it would be not that hard to find a trade partner. But now they're strapped into 3 more years of a situation that clearly didn't pan out as they had envisioned when they signed him to that deal. And some of it, obviously, Elton Brand is still a new GM, and he's a guy that invested a lot in Al Horford, and he doesn't want to, like any normal person, I'm sure he doesn't want to look bad necessarily and admit that it was a bad signing. But, ultimately, if things don't change in terms of his fit or his role on the team, because, if you're paying a guy over $100 million over 4 years to give you, 4 points and 6 rebounds a game, it's just not money well spent. And I think ultimately, the short term, they obviously hope he can contribute this season, but afterwards, I think you're really going to have to, look in the mirror and see if it's the best fit moving forward for the next 3 seasons.
Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but do you think that contract's even movable?
For pennies on the dollar, some team would like Al Horford, I think, and he would fit on a lot of teams in the league today as a 5-man. A lot of the younger teams, I think, could definitely use him, and they would probably take the financial part off of the Sixers' hands. But I don't know, at that point, what you'd be getting in return for, what was supposed to be a pretty high top tier, high profile free agent signing for this team to take the next step. And it kind of, it's just gone in the other direction. So his value, even to what it was when they first signed him to what seemed to be like kind of a longer term deal, has definitely dropped since, people have seen him with the Sixers. But from what I've heard, at least there's still, a few teams around the league that value, both what Al brings to a team, both on and off the floor.
So that opens me up to a twofold question then with Horford then, which is number one, what kind of teams do you think would be interested and even able to make a deal for Horford? And the second question is, how likely would it be for the Sixers to even trade him, considering the fact that this entire environment with the NBA season ending in October and the potential of it not even starting until January? I mean, the whole world is flipped on its head. So, there's a lot of what ifs going on here.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Josh. And obviously, the longer the Sixers hold on to Al Horford, the easier it will be to trade him in terms of the years remaining on his contract. But I think there's the teams that would be potentially interested in him are some of the teams that are, younger core teams that could use both a perimeter or a post player and a veteran leader. The Grizzlies are a team that come to mind. The Kings are another team that come to mind. Potentially the Thunder. Some of these teams that have dynamic guard play in place, and even some, in the Grizzlies have a great forward in Jaren Jackson Jr. But, I think Al is just a guy that could come in. And at this point, too, he showed with the Sixers that he's willing to, be adaptable to the role, even coming off the bench for the first time in his career. So I think now that that's kind of that hurdle's been crossed at this point, and the money's already there for Al. Obviously, whoever trades for him will still be paying him the same amount. So I think there'll be definitely some teams that would be interested in him. And like I said earlier, at that point, it's just a matter of what the Sixers would be able to get back. This doesn't seem like it would be very good.
I'll throw a hypothetical at you. First round of playoffs, no Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid being the guy. Based off the size matchup that we all look at when it comes to those two teams playing each other, do you think that the Sixers could actually still win that series?
Yeah, I think the Sixers definitely have a chance with Joel playing, the way he's playing, and some of the other guys they have around him in the, in the earlier rounds at least. I think the trouble will come in, and we still don't know, Ben's status moving forward. But if he is out indefinitely, I think the trouble will come in the later rounds against a team like the Bucks or the Raptors or a team like that, where you'll miss Ben. You'll miss his ability, his creation on the offensive end. He generates so many looks for the Sixers throughout the game, and even though he obviously gets his fair share of slack for not shooting, what he does for their offense is huge. And then defensively, he's obviously one of the better defenders in the NBA. So I think early on, by going the offense more through Joel, which is what Brett said they're going to do, trying to get him more looks in the post and spread the floor around him, I do think that's a recipe for success. But I just question whether that'll be able to hold up once you get into the deeper rounds against some of the teams that will really be able to scheme Joel, send doubles and triples and things like that at him, and you'll need other guys to step up.
Michael Kaskey Blomain joining us on the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN, NBA writer for CBS Sports, also Sixers insider. Follow him on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB for all your Sixers and NBA news. Mike, speaking of Embiid, now that he's healthy, now that he's playing as well as he has for these first few games, what do you think this team can do heading into the postseason? Because analytically, they showed the numbers last night on SportsCenter. The Sixers actually are better if you go by the analytics with Embiid without Simmons on the floor. So could that translate into a long playoff run, no matter how long Ben Simmons is out, if Embiid can keep up this level of production?
Yeah, to an extent, Josh, I definitely think it can. The Sixers still do have a lot of talent, and the shift in style would be more in line with what's going on across the league today, with one big guy in Joel that would be in the post, and then basically just spreading the floor around him with four capable shooters at all times. And the Sixers defense has been solid. Before these Orlando games, it was a solid defense. So I do think they have enough talent to make a run into the postseason. It just becomes, my main question with Ben out will just be issues that they had in the postseason the past couple of years, which is once it comes down to crunch time, shot creation in the clutch. I worry, when your best player is a post player, that already kind of makes it a little bit difficult, because unlike a guard, the post player needs someone to get it into them, and better teams will have doubles and triples and schemes for Joel and make it really hard for him to get the ball. And even if he does get it, it'll be tough for him to do anything. And at that point, I think the biggest question about the Sixers will be, do they have enough weapons around him that can not only knock down shots, but also just create, put the ball on the floor, open up looks for other teams, collapse the defense, things like that. Because that's, Ben does a whole lot of that for the offense. And outside of him, and obviously Shake Milton has been a nice addition, but he's still unproven. And then, you look at their bench and there's not a lot of creators there. So I think that will be the biggest issue. But in the short term, for the rest of these seeding games in the first round or two, I think the Sixers could, be very formidable, relying on Joel and just surrounding him with shooters.
How did you feel about the Shake Milton and Joel Embiid bench argument? Obviously, Shake answered the bell the next night by taking the game-winning shot while Embiid was kind of looking for the ball in the post, which I think was, a pretty big sign for him to be able to do that after they just had the fight. But, how do you feel about that whole situation playing out?
Yeah, I didn't mind it. I thought it got, like a lot of things tend to do, I thought it got blown out of proportion a little bit. I mean, it happened right on the sideline and was caught by the camera, so obviously it was easier for people to critique. But, having been around teams and in locker rooms and stuff like that happens all the time. And if it was something that lingered, that would be more of an issue. But they both, like you just said, Shake obviously bounced back on the floor. Joel has made light of it on Instagram a couple times. They've obviously squashed any issues that they had between them. And it was just one of those things in the heat of the moment. I think ultimately it could work to potentially make them, a little bit tighter as a duo. I think Shake, obviously, by bouncing back, hitting that game winner and kind of responding, it probably earned Joel's trust a little bit more. They hadn't played together that much before Orlando. So, I think it was one of those things that happens in basketball, but there's no, I don't think it will have any lingering negative effects on the team for sure.
Now, there are a lot of people who are overreacting to Shake Milton. We've had people talking about, Shake Milton. Is he going to be the long-term point guard here? Could he potentially be an all-star one day? Some people have suggested that, the Sixers should hire a coach who is good for Shake less than who's good for Embiid and Simmons. So what really is the long-term perspective on Shake Milton, not just in the Sixers uniform, but as an NBA guard?
It's interesting, and I think we'll learn a lot about Shake now coming up, especially with Ben out, because so much more of the creation is going to fall on him. Coming into Orlando, they needed him to play a role, which is just a guard that could knock down shots and create when Ben didn't have the ball. Which was not, they didn't need him to be a guy that came out and dropped 30 and 8 every game. Now that's going to increase a little bit with Ben out, how much he's going to be expected to produce. And I think how he responds is going to go a long way to, determining his long-term future, not only with the Sixers, but in the league. As good as he was, he only played, less than 20 games for the Sixers earlier this season. There's really not, a lot of tape or anything on him. I think it's too early to really, define what he's going to be over the course of his career. But with all eyes on him now in Orlando, especially in Ben's absence, I think will be able to make a case for himself really strongly, one way or the other at least.
What are your thoughts on Tobias's game since being in the bubble? It seems like he's been more aggressive, and offensively, he has added a little bit.
Yeah, I've been impressed with Tobias. I think that's what the Sixers need him to be, especially with Ben out too. But just in general, they brought him to be, that third guy that could potentially put them over the top. And I thought at times, throughout the season and last year, he was too passive, and there would be too many stretches would go where he wouldn't really put his fingerprints on the game. And I think in Orlando, it's been a pretty clear effort on his part to, not let that happen. He's just been more aggressive, putting the ball on the floor, taking it into the paint, going for the offensive glass. So, overall, I've been really impressed with his game, and the Sixers will need even more of that from him coming up.
That brings me to Josh Richardson. I'm just so confused on what his role is. And it's not just his fault when I bring up the defense, because we've seen these fourth quarter defenses lately. They've been giving up 40-plus points, and it's been abysmal. But, going back to Josh Richardson, I'm just so confused on what his role is at times.
Ideally his role on paper when the Sixers had their starting lineup to start the season, he was the fifth guy you would consider offensively. And his role really is kind of just to be a 3-and-D guy for the team. It's been a little bit more now, obviously, with, some of the injuries, but basically he's here to guard their guards on the other team. Now he's struggled with doing that at times. But the team as a whole has struggled defensively. But he's, a guy that's supposed to be able to, you put him on a Kemba or a Kyrie or something like that. And it's, guys that have torched the Sixers in the past. He's supposed to, the first line of defense. And then offensively, just a guy that can knock down shots. I think Brett Brown has tried to put him in roles that he's not necessarily comfortable with at times. As he's not a ball handler, he's not a backup point guard necessarily, and I think they've tried to fit like a square peg in a round hole sometimes in terms of that, and that's kind of probably has led to some of the confusion, or why is that his role? But in an ideal situation on a well-structured team, he'd be a guy that you're not expecting to give you a lot offensively, just to knock down open shots and to play some really good perimeter defense.
Working under the assumption that Ben Simmons is going to miss the projected time they say he's going to miss, the 2 to 4 week window, I'm assuming that means that Ben would miss at least the first round of the playoffs. So how do the Sixers minus Ben Simmons with the team that they have? Tobias Harris playing great. Bench has been solid at times. But how do they match up versus their potential first-round opponents?
It's tough depending on who they play. Right now, if they played the Celtics without Ben Simmons, I think that's really tough, because you're looking at a team that has, 3 really good perimeter players in Kemba Walker, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown. And Ben, if Josh would have been on Kemba Walker, Ben would have been tasked with guarding one or the other of, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I think without him in there to try to slow one of them, it's a pretty tough matchup. You probably lean really heavily on the Embiid and Horford pairing in that situation, obviously to neutralize some of the size. Boston's not the biggest team. They have, Daniel Tice and Cantor. But, I think that would be a tough matchup. If they're able to slide up into that fifth spot and go against the Heat, I think that would be a little bit more, probably a better matchup for them, especially with Ben's sideline. They could play a little bit smaller space, spread the floor out around Joel. But, either way, without Ben, it's definitely going to be tough. It would be tough anyway. The East has been really good this year, but I think when you're missing a perimeter defender like Ben, it just really makes everything more difficult matchup-wise.
I'm sure we'll be talking more NBA throughout the coming weeks as the bubble has been hot. And as all guests, Michael Kaskey Blomain joined us on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Follow him on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB for all your NBA and Sixers news. And, of course, check out his work over at CBS Sports, where he writes about the NBA and the Sixers. Mike, appreciate the time and enjoy the games tonight.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.